Daniel Ameli. He's right here. He's joined us. He's part of the Miami Bit Devs. Daniel will be our moderator, and the rest of the team is here. Daniel, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you for the introduction. Happy to be here, and we'll try not to have things too technical, of course. But anyway, I just want to give the panel members each a chance to introduce themselves. So, and David, if you want to start.
Sure. My name is David Branscombe. I'm a miner in Texas, where the hash rate comes from. If you don't know, it's estimated we've got about anywhere from 15 to 20% of the global hash rate is actually happening in Texas. So we got lots of power, lots of fun stuff happening there. So I come from an infrastructure background. I do have some of my own mining. I've built data centers. I'm more of a hardware guy than anything else, but I am very interested in how the future of Bitcoin is going to affect what we are able to do and how it connects to energy and how it helps human beings prosper.
Great, yeah, everything's bigger in Texas, so it's great to have the miner's perspective here. Randy?
Yeah, so my name is Randy. I'm a software engineer. I work full-time on Bitcoin for a company called Blockstream. I work on Lightning technology. Right now, something called Greenlight, which is like cloud lightning, but it's non-custodial. And yeah, thanks. And I used to work on something called Liquid. I used to make some tools for that. I'm interested in scaling, so any research involving that, or Covenants, if you've heard of it. Yeah, that's it for me.
Liran?
My name is Liran. I work for TBD, which is a subsidiary of Block. I'm a software engineer, and I work around something called Web 5 and decentralized identifiers.
Finally, we have Setsus.
Hello. Is it on? Yeah. Okay. My name is Seth Zeus. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Bitscript, bitscript.app. We are building out a suite of Bitcoin development tools. So anything from a deserializer to a script sandbox and a bunch of technical jargon, which I won't get into right now.
Before the whole Ordinals controversy started, I saw a small presentation by Casey Rodamore introducing his idea of Ordinals at Pleb Lab in Austin, Texas, and he was saying, well, this particular SAT is special. This is the first SAT of the halving block, and then this is this one is more rare and this one is less rare, and it seemed like an interesting idea, and I didn't know that this would blow up and then become this big controversy now that has really divided Bitcoiners into maybe three different camps, right? People who think that the ordinals, runes, and inscriptions has created this new opportunity, new way to use Bitcoin, new revenue for the miners, right? As we have halvings, that revenue from the Coinbase reward goes down, and they're excited about that, and that's become a big part of some of these Bitcoin magazine's conferences now. Then there are people who are somewhat indifferent to it or think that it's it's just noise or people being silly and not worth worrying about. And then there's people who are actually trying to filter it out or trying to figure out how they can stop it because they feel like it's an attack on Bitcoin in terms of usability or fungibility, right? So I'm going to ask, what do you think, starting with the miner, what do you think about what's going on with ordinals and runes and how it affects mining and the Bitcoin network?
So I'm kind of torn on this subject. Not trying to remain diplomatic because I can get just as angry as anybody else. But I feel that so I get up every morning and I take a look at Luxor's website and I check the hash price, which is how much money a miner is making per terahash or per petahash that they have online. I take a look at the global hash rate and see what the network looks like. I check those just about every single day. And so right now, since the halving, you will notice the great capitulation is happening, right? It happens every cycle. The value of your miner's hash rate has gone down dramatically. So I don't know if any of you are doing any kind of retail hosting, what you're paying for, per month per miner, but you can do the math. For every petahash you have right now, you're only making about $49 a day. That is down from its high. We did have a huge bump because of ordinals because of the hype, right? So a part of me thinks a lot of what's actually being put on the blockchain from that aspect is a load of bullshit, right? It's some of it is just, cartoons for cartoon's sake kind of thing, which is fine. But as an artist, I actually got my degree in art, so I understand the idea of trying to make something unique, trying to make something individual that is one of a kind. And Bitcoin being a time chain, that is a very unique opportunity for us, right? To use that ledger. However, I personally would like to see it used for something, that's going to have long-term value, right? That's going to help out humanity as a whole. And I just don't think looking back in the history books, people are going to get excited about a bunch of, monkey JPEGs, right? I just don't. But at the same time, I know that as a miner, I'm kind of at the mercy of the free market, right? Whatever the free market decides. And also as a person who wants to be a sovereign individual, someone that wants freedom, I want to be able to do what I want to do when I want to do it, as long as it doesn't infringe upon the rights of someone else. I feel that if that's the way that the market goes, I'm okay with those fees. Right after the halving, we were supposed to see that break happen immediately, and we didn't. I mean, the fees for the blocks right after that halving, because of this hype, whether there really is a way to identify a single sat or not, right? We kind of needed it. It was kind of good to have, right? So that was a lot to say. I don't really have a position. I think that really ultimately what this comes down to, right, is whatever the consensus the market feels is the value, ultimately that is what it's going to be. And ultimately that is what I want, because that means that everyone is able to freely make their choice. It's not one single group that is basically deciding who or what the rest of us do, if that makes any sense at all.
Great. So yeah, the halving ended up being like a doubling.
Yeah.
Right. We saw that the first few miners to mine those blocks after 840,000.
You mean Foundry?
Yeah. Well, right. They were
Basically.
making like 40 Bitcoin in fees per blocks, right? So yeah, and I think you pointed out that, right, Luxor is very pro Ordinals and Runes, maybe actually supporting some of the development or activity behind that. And then at the other extreme, we actually have the Ocean Pool, which is actively against that and said that they're not going to mine any of those blocks.
I personally mine with both. I do a little of both, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think about, Ocean's approach here in terms of trying to filter that out? Do you think that's sustainable or makes sense?
They're not really forcing someone to filter. They're giving people a choice, right? Like, so they have multiple templates. When you mine a block, ultimately the big giant pools are the ones that decide that, what the block looks like ultimately, and then you're just renting your hash rate out to them. Ocean came along and said, well, we're going to give you some options so I can choose what to mine. So I can choose to mine, I can mine with Ocean and allow Ordinals. They have multiple templates, right? So it's just giving the miners the choice. It's not really quite the attack on and censorship that everyone says it is. They are non-KYC, which means they don't require me to tell them I'm mining with them. So from a regulatory standpoint, in the future, Bitcoin mining in the U.S., that's another thing they'll have to tackle. But they don't really censor. They just give you the options, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's great that you can choose even within a pool, right, and not just have to choose between pools as well. But you can redirect your activity pretty quickly. Anyone here currently mining on the pool? Yeah? Okay, got a few hands in the back.
Mel did very well.
That's great. And also, Ocean was saying that they're going to implement like a lightning payout as well. I don't know if anyone wants to talk about if they think how that might help or it might make sense for. Oh, it's live? Great.
Yeah, so I've played around with mining in the past, buying some hash rate, putting it to a mining pool, and I was surprised to see that there was a minimum amount that you could withdraw when Lightning has been a thing for a couple different years. And I think that this as an innovation will definitely help decentralize mining because I won't feel locked into my pool account until I am able to generate the minimum withdrawal amount. So I think that's a positive, and I like to see adoption of layer 2 technologies in general. As hopefully a lot of you know, Bitcoin as it is today doesn't scale all that well for small payments in the future. And it will essentially price people out of making Bitcoin transactions in the future unless we come up with new scaling solutions. But layer 2s will be a very important part during this transitionary period of us figuring things out.
You're already seeing a lot of the retail miners get pushed out because of especially during the halving and that sort of thing. Decentralization of mining is very important. So this is a huge step in retail, kind of a lower level of mining for you to be able to still mine at home when it's worthwhile, when it's valuable. There are technologies out there that people are working on that I think eventually, mining at home or using it for heat recapture, using it as a hot water heater, dry your laundry, things like that will eventually come about. And I think Lightning is a big step towards that.
There's something satisfying about mining yourself, even if it's not a profitable operation, that it's just nice to see that there's a box that's actually making Bitcoin for you, and you're supporting the network, and you are making that choice of what pool you want to mine to and how you're supporting, and you're contributing to the decentralization. Do you think Bitcoin mining has gotten too centralized now?
I mean, that's what Ocean's trying to do is, give people more of an option. If you take any two of I think the top 4 or 5 pools and put them together, they're at least 35% of the total hash rate. You take the top 2 and I think they're at 51%, right? So it's there needs to be more options. I will say this. I mean, honestly, one of the best ways you can do it, to help with decentralization is not necessarily, mine yourself, but just run a node. I mean, people don't really understand that the node is actually what verifies the block, right? So miners, yes, do get to choose where they're pushing for that template, and but the nodes are the ones that So, I mean, one of the best things you can do is run your own node. And then also set up your own Lightning node, right? And run your own channels. Take the time to do that. If you're running a core or knots node, and then you're running your own channels, your Lightning channels, there's not really many people that can come and turn you off. That's what I think is kind of the most powerful piece about actually mining, and it gives you the ability to control your own money, Bitcoin as a whole, obviously, but mining and nodes and Lightning as well.
Yeah, in the early days, nodes and mining were sort of not separated concepts from each other. But now a lot of people who are mining, they're just connecting to a pool and using the pool's node, right? And there's a lot of people who aren't mining, but they want to have a node so they can check the state of the network themselves, that they can decide what software that they're running, what code it is that they're running, that informs their view of the Bitcoin network and lets them know if they got paid or not. So you mentioned knots, which is an alternative to the more common Bitcoin core node implementation. Do you think having multiple implementations is good for the network? Or so did you want to say something else?
I have a general more
Yeah.
so. I think on Ordinals, we're all kind of neutral-ish, at least developer side. But I think there is something that I do want to bring up that, because I think we can argue for trade-offs continuously on both ends. But I think where we're starting to see really negative downside, or at least where I'm curious to hear your perspective specifically, is where we see miners actually auctioning private blocks. So for example, Marathon auctioning off private blocks that are 100% all ordinals or 100% all ruins. I think we can go back and forth on, yeah, listen, it's free speech, I don't like it, I'll protect it, whatever. But what happens when we see a fabrication of the mempool? So what's your thought on that? Because that's an interesting one to me.
Right. So that's the challenge here. And yes, and this is the same issue you ran into with some other, centralized opportunities to sell your hash rate, right? So when I first got started, to be fair, I never kept any of it, right? But I started out mining Ethereum, right, before I figured out how to mine Bitcoin, because I came into it right after it was no longer worthwhile to mine Bitcoin with 480 cards. Yeah, the red pill wasn't working anymore. So so it was like, and I didn't have the money at the time to invest in an ASIC, right? And so because it was at the high, I came in late, and so I was using, the was it Dagger Hashimoto or whatever, for Ethereum and mining that, but then I was immediately converting it, and then I realized it's like, oh, I could point it to somebody like NiceHash and do this or whatever, and they pay me out in Bitcoin, right? So there's different other opportunities to do that, but what you don't realize is ultimately it's they require, if you're going to run in the U.S., right, for the most part, especially these large pools, especially the ones that are, well, I don't know if any of them are officially public, but they have to be transparent, but you have to be transparent with them. You have to tell them your information, and they get to tell that information to the U.S. government, right? So they have to do that in order to maintain to meet their regulatory requirements in the United States, right? What they don't have to do is tell you what they're using your hash rate for. They don't have to tell you that, right? So they don't have to tell you if there's runes, if it's this, if they're using it for something completely different that you have no idea, if they're using it for, I don't know, some sort of military application, who knows, right? They don't have to tell you, which is crazy. And so that's what I think what is such a big deal about Ocean is they're like, you see everything. They're transparent, right? Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think all of the pools are out there doing these shenanigans, right? They're not, and I definitely don't have any proof of that. But I know that it's not transparent. They're just so that's it's like I'm wanting to do something at my house, and I pay the electric company. Well, I get my electricity and I plug in what I want and I do what I want, right? The electric company will continue providing that as long as I pay my bill. It's the same way with the pools, right? The hash rate and the miners are literally just the muscle and the compute pushing it as far as most of the pools go. If you are mining with Ocean, then you have a little more transparency. You have a little more decision, right, on what you are. And I saw the block the other day. It was unbelievable. There was like no fees in the block. Did you see that? There was no fees. It was just a reward. Yesterday, thank you. Yeah, and I was like, this is the weirdest thing. I've never seen that before. There was no fees, no real transactions. It's just like they got the block, and that thing went through. And when I looked at the goggles, if I'm not wrong, I don't think there was any runes. There was nothing on it, right? Right. It was like super clean, and I was like, that's really interesting, right? So there was enough hash rate, and or the percentage, the numbers hit, right, to give them that block, and there was enough people on mining on the template that said we don't want to allow any of this stuff at all, and they just happened to hit it. And to me, when I think about the numbers, I mean, they hit the lottery like 3 times in a row to hit that number. You know what I mean? It was very unique. So these are the kind of interesting things that are happening. And you think, okay, well, the odds of that are slim, but it may never happen again. But when it does happen one time, people do it again because they think, oh, it happened. So now it's going to, so it's a psychological thing. Same reason why people do solo mining, right? It's like, oh, somebody won a solo mining block. I'm going to win one.
That means I can win one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so solo mining is when you're trying to find a block directly instead of contributing your hash rate to a pool. So for somebody who has just a Bitcoin ASIC space heater at home, right, their chances of finding a block are almost like winning the lottery. It's very low, but on the other hand, that can be more interesting than saying, oh wow, I'm making 1 penny's worth of Bitcoin a day or something, right?
It's weird though. It does happen like once or twice a year though. Almost every year it happens at least like twice. It's weird. What? Are you serious?
You're saying empty blocks, right? Just no transactions.
No. These are solo mining. This is somebody
not part of
like
the
I've got an S19 in my laundry room, and I plug it in when I'm not using my dryer, and I'm running it through my network, and I hit and I win 3.125 Bitcoins.
It's a big gamble.
So
Like it's insane. The odds of that happening just blow me away. And Mel's saying it's like 150 a year. That's crazy. I need to do some more solo mining, I think.
So it's I think CK Pool has a solo pool actually, and they've said, oh yeah, somebody
It's essentially it's not like it's not a pool per se, but it is somewhere you direct it and then they direct it, but instead of sharing it amongst the pool, whichever account actually hits, they keep 100% of the reward. So you're agreeing to basically get 100% of the reward. It's weird.
But as Setsus raised the point, right, miners are getting paid from the new Bitcoin being produced, the Coinbase reward, but that gets cut in half every 4 years. Then they're getting paid from the fees attached to the transactions. But then there's this new form of revenue that they're getting paid potentially out of band. That whether
Right.
that's somebody writing a check or wiring money to them or handing them cash or something else, that the mining pools could be paid to include other transactions. And the issue is that that's not transparent, right? So you don't see it as part of the mempool. So it's possible the mempool will become less useful for figuring out what fees you should pay to get your transaction through. But then there's that risk of centralization there that you're only going to pay these large pools really to do that. You're not going to pay a small miner to include your transaction if they're only finding blocks every few weeks or something, right?
I think one of the interesting things about that is, although the fees that they're making aren't transparent, the fact that they are not using, the regular block templates is, we can look at the Explorer, we can compare it with what like a normal node under default settings may see for that type of block or the template that they would have expected. So we can see when miners are being, funny, let's say, and yeah, I think that participants can vote with their hash power, right? If they're not seeing the fees, they maybe don't know how much of that they'll be, allocated. So they'll move to a different pool that is more transparent.
Agreed.
So do you think there's any upcoming changes in Bitcoin that could help with the decentralization of mining or make the things more fair for smaller miners?
Yeah, I think Stratum V2 is important discussion to have with mining pool operators, although some people say that they don't have much incentive to be open in terms of allowing individuals to propose block templates, which is part of the Stratum V2 complete proposal. I think it can definitely help move the space. It's letting the people who provide hash rate know that they have power when it comes to the decisions that these mining pools make will really help transition the space to thinking in a more decentralized mindset. Because even talking about private mempools, who does that really benefit in the end? If I'm a mining pool operator and I have a non-trivial percentage, but I don't have monopoly on things, do I really want everyone to have private mempools or fee system that you can only get if you're my client? I feel like that tends more towards big players in the space where it helps them the most, because if I have a monopoly on everything and I'm providing the fees, I feel like the people who are providing the hash for that mining pool operator, they're the people who are getting screwed over, because the people who are keeping this business afloat are the people who are going to get left out of all this information. So I think it's in people's best interest to have a public mempool, and I think it's in people's best interest to move to Stratum V2, and this goes for the people who provide hash to mining pool operators and even the smaller mining pool operators when compared to these bigger ones who control most of the hash rate.
Right, and that was one of my concerns about people that had such a strong negative reaction to ordinals and runes, that they said they wanted to change their nodes to filter out these transactions, right? So that basically when somebody wants to make a transaction, it's being broadcast out to nodes, and those nodes are sending it to other nodes until it's eventually picked up by a mining pool that finds a block. So you can change your node to have whatever behavior you want, right? And you can choose not to propagate certain transactions. So we already have things like that will filter out, what they consider dust transactions, that someone's trying to, send 1 Satoshi as a layer 1 transaction that, that won't be propagated normally by most nodes. but there have been proposals, and some people have started running filters to try to block these transactions that they don't like, the ordinals and runes, even though those are actually typically paying rather high fees. So yeah, do you think that would negatively impact the mempool in terms of predictability?
Yeah, I think it definitely would. If you have more private mempools, you're not going to be able to do proper fee estimations like was mentioned. But yeah, I think that because there is an economic incentive to it, the miners will accept it in some form or another, right? It's going to get to them. We're already seeing that. We've even seen that before the ordinals thing, right? Some miners had forums on their websites where you can directly submit transactions to them that are non-standard transactions. They're consensus valid, but they might have something that is to prevent DDoS attacks or something like that, and they will accept it. Like one of those that we saw was when there was a lightning bug in LND, more specifically, and someone actually used a non-standard transaction that would normally not be propagated through the network. They sent it directly to a miner. That miner mined that block. They sent it to a pool. The miner mined that block, and then the LND broke for a couple days until they fixed that.
That was Barack.
Yeah.
So Barack was able to mine. I think it was a 998 out of 999 multi-sig, non-standard transaction that caused LND to malfunction. And he also figured out how to mine a special transaction that caused the ordinals to go out of sync. But fortunately, because the ordinals is somewhat arbitrary anyway, they can just fix it by declaring something else to be, the rare SAT, and it's back to functioning again.
It was Super Testnet who had the one that messed up the ordinal number.
Oh, that was Super Testnet? Okay.
But
yeah.
developer in the space.
But it goes to show that, that has existed even before there was like an economic reason to accept these types of transactions. So, what's stopping, miners and mining pools from accepting ones that actually will pay them a lot of money to do so? And we've seen that also start to happen. So, yeah, I think that filtering is not going to, in this case, is probably not going to be fruitful and is just going to maybe harm the network. But the flip side of that, I think, is that if we do see widespread filtering, and because it's something that part of the network does want to go through, it'll be interesting to see the type of solutions that are brought up that maybe will not have to be going directly to these pools, but something else that will help bypass filters, which I think is healthy, because at the end of the day, filters are a form of censorship, right? Maybe you're not trying to ignore blocks that had that. It's a different kind of censorship to try to build on a different tip. But if you're still trying to prevent people from being able to broadcast their transactions, that is a form of censorship. So I think we should kind of learn how to deal with that.
So we've seen turnover in the mining pools over the years, right? At one point, gigahash.io was getting to over 40% of the network. Now they're gone. And a few years ago, Foundry didn't even exist, and now they're a pretty substantial part of the hash rate. But do you think that this distribution of maybe one large pool having 30%, one having 20%, one having 15% is just the way it naturally plays out, given that people want to have blocks at a certain frequency, right? Do you think that we could have a lot more smaller mining pools in the future, or is this where it normally comes out to? This is the equilibrium.
Yeah,
basically.
I think we're going to always try to decentralize, but I think it's just organic to see a sort of like power law distribution along mining power. It just seems inevitable, but I think it's something that, even though we know it's happening, we should consistently try to decentralize more and more and more.
There's no defined answer for that, right? I mean, as I'm listening to this, you can go as philosophical as you want with it, right? But ultimately, what's great about Bitcoin is you play by the rules or you don't play, even if you don't like the rules, right? So ultimately, Bitcoin is what I consider to be the ultimate supply and demand capitalistic kind of formula, right? So if we see value in it, people will figure out ways to do it. If there is value in it for whatever you're getting in exchange, people will figure out ways to do it, right? It's if we someone decides to filter something and we decide it's for the greater good, well, we need that censorship, right? That censorship is good, but if we want to do something and someone is telling us we can't, then that censorship is bad, right? There's really not a we're going to go this way, we're going to go that way kind of thing. Ultimately, just like any other new technology, you're not going to know what it is until you look back 20 years. We can look at it. I mean, it's only 15 years old, really. Ultimately, right? So
Agreed on that, but again, I think the math in terms of like the distribution by power law is just never. If mining is just a proxy for for resource allocation, it should therefore always follow the same distribution laws of capitalism in general, for better or worse, right? But yeah, I don't see that changing anytime soon.
And I think the actual like pool centralization will matter less once Stratum v2 is there, because actual hashers will be able to vote with their hash as to what templates they want to contribute to. So they won't have to switch around between pools as much. They could just, the pool just becomes a service operator at that point and has less control over what's actually happening.
Yeah, I also like to add that I'm not sure how big a problem it is to have mining pools dominate the market, as long as the people with the ASICs have decisions on where to point their hash. They always need to be in control of their vote. They have to understand what it means to stick to one mining pool operator. In that sense, it's almost an education problem. Telling someone that they can make more money if they learn how things work and switch over to different mining pool operators. But in terms of having one party have all this hash rate, I think there are some positive externalities. For example, having enough liquidity to pay people per whatever share of hash that they're contributing. Whereas if you had a lot of different mining pools, then they wouldn't be able to pay the people who are giving them hash on a regular basis. There's a lot of liquidity they need to have up front because they might not find a block until like a month or a year, depending on how big your mining pool is. So there is a point where your mining pool might be too small to make sense.
So do you think miners should be trying to maximize their, how much money they can get, or should they also be considering other things such as, the health of the network or being a good steward of Bitcoin in some way? Because if they're being, profit maximizing, they're more predictable, but maybe that's not the best for Bitcoin.
I don't think it's worth speculating. I think it's just worth like realizing that the incentives are always going to win out on a long enough timeline, right? Personally, I like what Luke is working on. I like Knots. I like how they're sort of fighting their own way. But yeah, I think it's at least as a developer, it's safe to always assume miners are going to act in a capital like profit maximizing way, and I think that's a good thing for what it's worth. Like you're saying, it's predictable. It's how they secure the network. Like I want the miners to eat, right? So
I also think that, if you're a miner and you're investing in all this, capital expenditure over and over and over again, you are going to naturally care about the health of the network as well, right? You are going to care about your profits. But you're also going to think about like, I want to do this long term, so I want those profits to continue. So I think it has an equilibrium on its own, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. The reason why Bitcoin works is because miners are selfish and power hungry, right? So it's like that's the reason why it works is because of the proof of work. Well, we can't do work without energy, and we don't want to do work unless we're compensated for it by other forms of energy or exchanging our work for another good or service, right? So it's this constant play of how much can I spend or how much can I leverage myself against, to get this equipment, right? And then you have this equipment. How long and efficiently can I run this equipment to the most profitable, most efficient way possible? And how low of a cost can I run that equipment at that full out efficiency, right? So you've got a number, and you kind of need this antagonistic relationship because that is the same reason why you guys are developing, right, there are side chains, there's layer 2. The same reason we're looking at all of these different ways to utilize Bitcoin is the same reason we are all looking, as a miner, we are looking for new sources of energy. We are looking at ways to stabilize the grid. We are looking at doing methane mitigation, right? The methane mitigation may be, depending on who you talk to, may or may not be great for the planet. I don't care. That's energy that I could be used that right now is just disappearing into the atmosphere, right? We have plenty of energy. We just have an energy distribution problem. So as miners, we are going in and innovating and finding new ways to take advantage of these inefficiencies and make them more efficient. You want that struggle because that struggle drives additional innovation in energy consumption, in energy use, in monetary value and economics, in hardware development. I'm currently one of the things I'm very excited about, working with a new company. It's a form of DARPA technology. As much as I don't like DARPA, it's a new chip architecture, right? So people to reduce the amount of power needed for that compute and increasing the amount of compute for the size of the chip and the materials there. All of this innovation happens because of that relationship, because of that drive. So if every single miner out there was just killing it, super profitable all the time, we'd get lackadaisical. We wouldn't, innovate anymore. We'd get lazy and we'd get complacent, and then everything would flip. And that's just a fiat game, right? You'd actually need that constant struggle to stay focused.
The beauty of Bitcoin is it transparently aligns incentives.
And I also think there's a natural separation between some miners who only care about making the money and then the miners that care about fixing the money or working towards the Bitcoin protocol. I personally think that miners should try and make the most money that they can, and that the people who care about fixing the money, who look at the protocol, those are the people who should be the ones developing incentives such that the miners don't have to care. We want to get these people who are trying to optimize profits for free. We don't necessarily need to turn them into ideological converts, although that'd be nice if it was possible. But if they're willing to help further a cause without thinking about it, it's great as well.
Game theory is a wonderful thing, right?
Absolutely.
It's still just theory.
Do you think Bitcoin should be a monetary network, or it has a specific right way that it's used, or or are the other uses of it okay or helpful in that regard? Do some forms of adoption actually inhibit adoption, or do all forms of adoption increase adoption?
I think it's interesting that Bitcoin, the proof of work in Bitcoin really solved a very specific thing, which is coming to consensus on an ordering of things, right? That really doesn't have anything to do with money. It's just money is the best use of that, because also we need to provide some value for doing this work, right? Like, people are going to do it just for ordering things, so there has to be some sort of value tied to it. So it's like it's one of those things that the solution that Bitcoin came around is useful for many other things, but it has to have money embedded in it. It can't really work. Like when some people say, "Oh, just go start a different blockchain for XYZ," it's like, yeah, but no, why would anyone want to mine that? Why would anyone want? So then you get these tokens that become worth some sort of money, right? Like, even if they didn't plan on them becoming worth anything, it's a natural part if you want to do a proof of work type of blockchain, or any kind of blockchain, maybe. Less familiar with the other types.
In order to stay decentralized, it has to be tied to the proof of work. In my opinion, Bitcoin is the first real medium of exchange, store value, whatever you want to say. It is the closest tie to direct energy we've ever had, right? So if I were to give you an example, I took an Uber over here from the hotel, and ideally that guy, let's say it didn't take this much, but let's say it took him a gallon of gas to get me here. The best perfect way for me to transact with him would be to carry around 1.2 gallons of gas and give that to him in exchange for his gallon of gas, right? Because it's energy, it's a form that can be directly turned into work, right? It's actually a form of energy in waiting, not a battery, but just waiting to be utilized, right? Bitcoin is the closest thing we have that ties directly to that. So ultimately, if we were to, determine our value, it's like, well, what can you do, David? Well, I can stand up and I can pick up this table and carry it over there. That takes energy, right? Bitcoin is the first medium of exchange we've had that is this easily transferable, right? Otherwise, you just transact in barrels of oil, which is fine. You can put them in a tanker, but that's a lot, right? Gasoline works the same way. I can do work through my gasoline, drive my car, all that kind of stuff, or electricity into a battery. Forget about the fact that electricity probably comes from natural gas also. Forget about that. But you take all of this, electricity, battery, all that stuff. All that is energy. It's the ability to do work. It's the ability to grow food. It's the ability to irrigate. It's the ability to go out and pick my food and give it to somebody and distribute. That's all it is. Bitcoin is the first money we have that is tied directly to that. So Bitcoin will only ever be worth, as long as it stays proof of work, right? Bitcoin is the only money we have that will ultimately be decided on how much power and energy is used to either A, create it, or B, move it. It's the best medium of exchange we've ever had that's tied this closely to energy. So that is why it's so important, is because you can't change energy, or you can change it, but it can't be created or destroyed. It's there. So how do you use it? Same way that carries through to how you use your Bitcoin. You can't create more, you can't inflate it. So how do you use it? Well, you have to use it in the way that best suits you and or everyone else.
Yeah, I'd rather pay for my ride with Bitcoin than carry around a jerry can of gas.
Exactly.
Zeus?
Yeah, on my end, I think that a lot of people come to Bitcoin for different reasons. What excites me the most is the fact that it is the first, outside of gold, stateless money. And obviously, like from the energy perspective, it makes sense, especially coming from mining, coming from like cryptography or like a math perspective. The fact that I can flip a coin 256 times, multiply that times another number, and that's my bank account. No one can stop anyone from creating a bank, and like that to me is like the really exciting part of Bitcoin is the stateless money problem.
Yeah, and I wanted to say that there's almost a precarious relationship between protocols built on Bitcoin and Bitcoin itself as a money. Things like inscriptions and runes, they drive up the fees that miners can get from mining a block. Having more revenue and fees allows them to scale up their operation, provide more hash rate, more security for everyone who has UTXO on-chain, and for people who get into it in the future to have more hash rate as time goes on that are locking their coins. At the same time, you don't want to conflate a monetary asset with arbitrary assets, because you might have the arbitrary asset start guiding the development of the first asset or Bitcoin, in which case Bitcoin might be eroded in its value and it would have bad effects on this arbitrary asset as well. So it's important to think about these type of things, not to say that there shouldn't be anything built on Bitcoin ever, but the incentives are very interesting in how they might interact when you have something built on it.
It's funny because and to a certain degree, I obviously agree with the problems and like the conflations that Ordinals are bringing up. But it's funny to think back on like what was the original product market fit of Bitcoin, which is obviously like the Silk Road and like how everything like played out there, and it just goes to show that like if that was the original market product fit and it survived, I think I have a lot of faith in any arbitrary assets that it that it can run into in the future. And again, the Ordinals thing is so interesting because there's trade-offs, because obviously like the other side of that's like, well, it's bringing in significantly more developers and interest from that side, right? But yeah, are people now conflating the value and like imagining things when it comes to this Satoshi is worth that, when again Satoshis are literally just a unit of measurement and not an actual thing. So yeah, the education part is going to be, I feel like the education part has always been missing, and that's why events like this are so important, is because the education part is not easy. You have to actually want to care about Bitcoin.
Do you think like layer twos might be the solution to this problem? That you could have layer twos on Bitcoin that would allow people to, you know, do this kind of these create these kind of assets and so on and trade them with each other without being as disruptive to the network? Or is the disruption part of the marketing strategy, just like you know, graffiti on the side of a building?
I think it's definitely a part of their marketing strategy. I mean, you know, but I do think, to go back to the original question, is I do think that using Bitcoin for the problem that it solves, ordering things, right, can be used in many other, you know, other layers, side systems, whatever you want to call them. They can use that. They should just think about using it efficiently in a way that scales to their use, both short term and long term. I mean, we all know whether you can inscribe today whatever JPEG you want for, I don't know, let's just put $100 that it costs to inscribe it. Is that, do you think that's what it's going to be, you know, 20 years from now? And if not, then what are those people going to be doing to try to do the same thing? And if it's something different, then why not work towards that different thing today is kind of my thing. On the flip side of that, I do think that it has provided fees for miners, and it's brought people in to even try to solve a problem that we knew was coming, but we didn't think we had yet, which is high fees for money transactions. We all know that we can't scale Bitcoin for everyone to be able to transact on the base layer. So it's like, but we keep pushing that problem off, and we're like, oh, we have this like quasi solution maybe, but no one wants to put money into it. Why? Because you can still transact on the base chain, but when you are having issues transacting on the base chain, and when your Lightning channel suddenly becomes unusable because the fee that it would take to close that channel is bigger than, you know, what you're trying to move. You know, these are problems that we need to solve, and we're never going to solve them until they're right in front of our face. I mean, that's just human nature.
Yeah, I'm pretty pro bullish L2 on, especially for like a lot of the reasons you're saying. Is it just creates incentives for people to start adopting a lot of these things off chain, and I think specifically Ordinals and Ruins did a really interesting job of giving an opening to L2s, because now Bitcoiners are realizing, well, who's more of a Bitcoiner? The person who is using strictly Bitcoin for everything, but is using JPEGs and shit on the L1, or is it the shitcoiner who is doing all the degen stuff on an L2, but is transacting and doing pure transactions on Bitcoin and L1?
I want to be careful that I'm not against protocols on Bitcoin for the most part. I want to be careful about policing people's transactions. I do want incentive alignment to gear towards Bitcoin being money, and I think we are already there in some ways. 2 input, 1 output SegWit transaction, I think in Bitcoin's current price, I tried looking it up, I think it's about 9 cents, which is almost nothing. With this 1 sat per vbyte, which it's probably not going to be, but multiply that by 10 sats per vbyte, 90 cents, you could be transferring $1 billion with 90 cents. Compared to an inscription, which would require a lot more data, that $90 could turn into 900 or 9,000. So in some ways, if we do believe Bitcoin will be the ultimate monetary asset, the fees that people are willing to pay will surpass whatever inscription someone wants to make. And they think their inscription is worth more than $1 billion transfer, right?
Which is why I think also just, you know, kind of getting derangement over ordinals and stuff like that and inscriptions it's kind of a waste of time, because we do know that in the future, people just won't do that anymore. It's too expensive. It doesn't make sense. People do things that make sense to them. You know, it just makes sense today because fees are low today, relatively. So, you know, I think, you know, having this derangement over them and all of that is just, that's a waste of time. Let's look for solutions.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, in the very beginning, 2009, there was only Bitcoin, and then all these other coins started being created, right? So, you know, and Bitcoin actually reduced the size of the op return and tried to make it harder for people to use Bitcoin for whatever else they thought would be interesting, right? And then so there were some people that when Ethereum was created, they moved off to that so they could create JPEGs and NFTs and all different kinds of things. And then we saw in 2017, we had different forks of Bitcoin where people wanted to just simply have larger blocks and take Bitcoin in also a different direction. A lot of there were a lot of OG Bitcoiners that left to participate in that ecosystem. And the interesting thing is that with some of the recent developments, they've actually brought some people back into the Bitcoin tent. So do you think is that a Bitcoin winning if it's bringing back some people who went off to other chains?
It feels like they're sucking some more liquidity in, right? Which to me is okay.
Yeah, I would say that is me. And that is 100% me, by the way. I went from Bitcoin to Ethereum. I literally fell for the LARP of like, oh, if Vitalik can't figure out how to program on Bitcoin, there's no way I can. I'm going to go to Ethereum. And so I actually ended up doing that exact cycle from Bitcoin to Ethereum to like stacks and then back to Bitcoin. And yeah, I would agree right now the things we are bringing are developers and capital and excitement for development.
Well, if you believe that Bitcoin is truly, infinity over 21 million, right? Eventually the black hole is going to envelop all of it, right? So so it's kind of funny. Someone said, well, what do you, I said, I don't understand the technology behind runes and ordinals. I really don't, right? I know the concept or whatever. I just know this. If someone takes a rare sat and puts it in their, wallet and will never transact it again because they feel like it's special, well, that just makes my sats that much more scarce. And ultimately, if the value of that sat is deemed no longer valuable, well, then that's just one more sat that can be transacted in Bitcoin at some point, right? So it's like Bitcoin is still Bitcoin, right? Regardless of what it's being done and used for. So ultimately, if they just decide that it just needs to be a medium of exchange, it can just be a medium of exchange. If we decide it needs to be the end-all, be-all historical digital ledger system, it can be the end-all, be-all historical ledger, right? It's whatever we deem its true value to be, right? I'm just excited to kind of be here along for the ride and watch it.
Same here. Excited to be along for the ride. And remember, every sat is special.
That's right.
Like a
They're all the
snowflake.
same.
What was it?
All the same.
Yeah.
Keep them safe, right? And again, right? People say, "What's a penny worth?" A penny's worth a penny, unless it happens to be, a penny from a specific year where they wanted to use copper for the war effort, and they started making pennies out of steel. And you could get one of those pennies, and for some reason, some collector will pay you $1 million or 100 million pennies for that penny. And that doesn't make sense to me, but clearly it does make sense to some other people. Similarly, at some of the rest stops along highways in the U.S., you can put in a penny and then put in maybe some quarters, and then the machine squishes the penny and then prints some image onto it or something. Yeah, so apparently there's a market for that too, right? So that's the ordinals are like, oh, this is a rare penny that from a certain year.
This is a rare Shamu penny, everybody.
And the inscriptions are like, you're just squishing the image onto the money. So, there's some people that want to, filter these things out because they're like, hey, Bitcoin should only be used for money, but then they're taking their buy Bitcoin stamp and stamping all the bills with that too. Ironically.
So they came out with the first sat of the new epoch, and that got auctioned off or whatever, and I immediately tweeted out, it's like, I want everyone to know I personally have I have one of 2.1 quadrillion sats in my wallet right now. I will readily sell it to anyone for 10 Bitcoin. It's super rare. There will only ever be 2.1 quadrillion of them. Let me know, DM me. I'm ready to go. Anytime you want.
We have some questions, Daniel.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
buddy.
I was just gonna say the funny thing is that there is no such thing as a sat. That doesn't exist. It's
I have a skin cell to sell you off of my arm right now, if you believe that.
Rare vintage.
Rare vintage skin cells.
Right, so we have audience questions.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great panel. So much knowledge. Really great to hear it from the dev side. Thanks for sharing. David, I have a question for you because I love your point about how Bitcoin is tied to energy through proof of work. And I think the last difficulty adjustment was like -5.6, something like that. You mentioned the post-halving miner capitulation. Do you think that's done, or do you think we're going to continue to see hash rate decline? And then a second part of my question, because you have so much hash rate, so I'm just wondering, what is your cost of production per Bitcoin? We mentioned this earlier, the role that that cost of production plays in price discovery. So I'm wondering, what is your cost of production, maybe with OpEx and CapEx, and a certain number you're looking for to start getting aggressive with further expansion?
That's probably that's a hard question to answer in a short time. But I would say, I mean, you can look at the hash rate right now. Yes, we had a negative difficulty adjustment just the other day. It came down to, in fact, I looked at it this morning, and I think we're sub 600, exahash right now. It's like 580 or something like that, right? So it's happening. We did get a little bit of a boost because of the ordinals and the runes, but it's going to continue. I actually wasn't in the space during the last halving, so I had to go back and look. But if you look at the trends, I don't think we're anywhere near being done. If you look at just regardless of how leveraged you are or what kind of money you have invested, if you're not under 6.5 cents right now, you're not breaking even. I think the hash price right now was like $48 a petahash, something like that. And so, do what? Oh, sorry. So it just depends on individual miners. It depends on their power rate. It depends on how leveraged they are, what their bills are, right? So the people that were not very smart, the same way that you saw during the last bull run in 2020, 2021, you see these people are they're starting to shut off, and it's usually because they just made bad choices, right? It's not just some of it is, okay, I have an older machine and it's on its last leg, and I'm only getting 80 terahash. I've got 80 terahash machines, and it's not as efficient. Joules per terahash, I'm paying 27, 30 joules per terahash. Okay, yeah, some of that, but a lot of it is people that got into it, didn't have good due diligence, didn't understand, didn't work with someone that understands how to manage their power agreements, how to manage power infrastructure, what the maintenance was, what the overall OpEx costs were. There's a lot of factors that go into that, right? So they made bad choices somewhere along the lines, and they're having to shut off. They're having to liquidate.
I'm going to hold the fire to you
Okay.
and say, if you had a industry average, what do you think the cost of production per Bitcoin is at this time?
Man, honestly, all I can tell you right now is just what Luxor says as far as what it takes to make one, and that's it. And it's like right now, so if for every petahash you have on, you're making $49 a day. That's all. It's almost impossible for me to say. I've worked on different projects. I've worked on one project in Europe that is basically using heat recapture, right? So what we're doing is pre-warming water for boilers for municipalities over in Norway, right? So what they're doing is, let's say, these are not the right numbers, but let's say I'm buying 3-cent power. I'm selling the heat back to them at the equivalent of 3.2-cent power, right? And I'm providing that heat by mining Bitcoin in immersion cooling. So people say, well, at what point would Bitcoin make you have to turn off? 0. Negative, right? Because all the Bitcoin that we're getting is 100% ours to keep. The 10% or 10% that we're charging on top of that goes to cover operations. Does that make sense? So it's like everybody, this is what's so important about this relationship we were talking about earlier. As we innovate, we find new, more efficient ways to capture energy, to use energy, to, what did Warren Buffett say? The 3 things that kill a man are ladies, liquor, and leverage, right? We find you don't over leverage yourself. You find more efficient ways to do this. It's going to vary so much, so greatly, it's hard for me to say. You also have to watch, what the value of ASICs are. And they're going to go down because all of these older, less efficient ASICs are going to hit the market. You'll have some people that are mining for cheaper power or with cheaper power. They're going to be smart. They're going to take these. Gridless is an amazing company that goes to Africa, and they build these small hydroelectric, tiny micro, hydroelectric power generation facilities, and they take people from the local villages. Well, they don't care what it is, right? Their power is not free, but pretty much free, right? So they're using what little Bitcoin they have. They're taking these older, maybe S9s, but mostly like these older machines that are not going to work. So we're finding secondary markets and things like that. That's what's exciting is while that cost for somebody like Riot, Core Scientific, Marathon, right? They're always latest and greatest, best, or whatever, leveraging to get the latest and greatest technology. But that secondary market in places like countries in Africa and maybe some over in Europe, and we're finding these new applications for this as well. So it's hard to say across the entire network what that cost is, but we can get deeper into it offline if you want.
Thank you for
Yes,
going into it.
let's do
Jack,
that.
if I can. Setsus, one quick question, because we talked about Lightning and layer 2s, and I know you play a role in stacks. So I just wanted to get your opinion on proof of transfer and the importance that it's going to play in the future of scaling Bitcoin.
Or not. True. Yeah, and yeah. Funny enough, I was actually a core engineer for the POX4 contract itself. Again, in my opinion, is Bitcoin MEV is here, whether we like it or not. I think miners are going to start sharpening up and seeing that there are L2s that they can recycle their hashing power and make more money from. I think recycling the hashing power that Bitcoin is already incurring to, again, in my opinion, offload a lot of the degen shit and keep the L1 clean is something I'm generally bullish for. Whether Stacks itself needed its own shitcoin or not to leverage and to bootstrap developers into the ecosystem, et cetera, that's a much longer conversation that we can have. But in general, yeah, I think, again, I'm a big believer in Ordinals and Ruins bringing excitement, development, and capital. Good. But I would like to see L1 stay for pure transactions, get all that off into L2s. And if the miners can make more money from doing that, again, we like miners making money. So.
Thanks to the panel and everyone else.
Thank you, gentlemen. Well done.